Here we go. Okay, we've got 5 Instagram tips for boom authors, and I'm going to kind of cover some basics and go into more specifics as well. So you already kind of introduced me, but I just wanted to give a little bit more background. I think a really important piece of information is that I've been gradually adding a new piece of strategy to my marketing the whole time. So this is not a do everything all at once game ever. So if this is something that you're like just starting to dabble in or just starting to learn, that's okay, right? You can do a little bit at a time until you feel comfortable with adding more to your plate. I'm just here to share what I've learned along the way. So this is my handle. I know it's kind of tricky to say, it's a bit of a mouthful, but if you're looking for more on Instagram, teach.the.teachyourauthor is where you can find more Instagram tips, reels, lives, video recording, all of that sort of stuff. So here's our 5 tips that we're going to cover and kind of get more into: branding, consistency, how to organize your ideas, how to streamline the whole process, and then how to encourage action from your audience. All right, so let's start with branding. Branding is super important for your Instagram because it builds awareness and it builds relationships. And the most basic part of branding are your fonts and your colors, right? So you're going to pick 2 to 3 fonts. And 2 to 3 colors is a good place to start. Some people have like up to 7 colors, but right, just 2 to 3 is a good place to start. You always, always, always on everything that you post on Instagram, you want to include your logo, your watermark, or at least your Instagram handle. Okay, so every piece of content that you push out should have one of those 3 things on it, right? Just like we tell students, put your name on it, put your name on it, put your name on it. Put your name on the work that you're creating and sharing for your audience. And then lastly, create templates for consistency. So once you've decided on your brand, your fonts and your colors, you've got your logo, your watermark, all of that figured out, go into wherever you like to design. Maybe you're a PowerPoint person, maybe you like to work in Canva, wherever it is that you like to work, and create templates. And then you can just reuse them over and over again, but it will also help you be more recognizable because people, as they're scrolling your feed, they're going to say, oh, hey, that's them, right? They're going to recognize you, which is that awareness and then that relationship piece of branding. So to talk a little bit more about templates, what kind of templates? So when I say templates, what for? Carousel posts. And if you're, in case you're not familiar with them, carousel posts on Instagram are any of the posts on your feed that have more than one image or more than one video in them. So where you can swipe back and forth, that's a carousel post. And you can do up to 10 images and videos in a carousel. Mockups. So when I say mockups, those are things like stock photos where you can layer images or videos of your cards and of the decks being played right on top. And I like to have a few mockups that are kind of like my go-to, so that way when I'm creating images to show like, hey, I just made a new deck, do you want to see what it looks like? I just put the video right on top. And then it looks pretty and it looks nice, and it helps people understand like this is what this could look like in your classroom when you use it. IGTV covers, which Instagram is kind of relabeling this category, but an IGTV or just a video on Instagram is anything that's longer than that 60-second mark. So especially if you're on YouTube, like if you are creating longer video content on a regular basis, you want to repurpose that content for your Instagram. So using some sort of IGTV template to plug in that video will make it be more consistent in your branding and also help you repurpose that content on a regular basis. And then the last one is I would recommend having a set of Reels covers that you just reuse over and over again, maybe 15 that you're just gonna be like, okay, now I put in this title and now I have this. But that helps you, again, go faster in creating your content and then be more recognizable for your audience. 2 is consistency. Consistency. Choose and maintain a consistent schedule, but be realistic with yourself. I think sometimes people get into Instagram and they're like, okay, I have to post 7 times a week or 14 times a week, like several times a day in order to serve my audience or to grow on Instagram or to have this be a thing that's serving you in your business. And that's just not realistic for so many of us, unless you're hiring somebody to do social media for you, which is possible, like people do that, but many of us don't, or don't have time for that or the money for that or the space for that, right? Most of us are just teachers doing this thing. So be realistic with whatever schedule you have in mind. And I know I'm talking about being consistent, But I also want you to consider that that consistent schedule can be flexible with your life. There are times where consistency might have to take a backseat to something else that's going on in your life, in your personal life, and that's okay, right? So be consistent, but also don't be afraid to adjust your schedule if you know, okay, August is this crazy time of year for me. It's super exhausting with getting my classroom ready, with getting back into everything. And I know that in June and July, I can post 7 times a week, no problem, super easy. August, though, that's not going to happen. So think about, how do I shift this consistency in this schedule and make it work for what else is happening in your life? Just being realistic with what else is going on in your life and your family's life. So when we talk about consistency, how many times a week do you want to post? Consider your growth, right? Maybe your goals. Maybe your goal is to grow, and maybe your goal is just to kind of establish a presence so that if somebody searches for you on Instagram, like, hey, there I am, I exist, So think about, what is a schedule that you can maintain, right? I kind of talked about that already, but I also want you to plan for different types of content. Instagram has kind of grown into this beast, right? First of all, when it started, like, I don't even know how long Instagram has been around now, years, right? When it first started, it was like, take a picture of my brunch and share what I'm eating. And now it's, photos and videos and reels and lives and collaborative posts and all sorts of different kinds of content. And those are called content types. So when you're thinking about your consistent schedule, also consider, how can I include a variety of content types? And so when we're thinking about marketing boom cards specifically, you could show like a picture of one of your cards from a deck, and you could do a video where they're swiping through, or they're doing the activities, whatever, however you've designed your boom cards, so that way they can see. And then that's 2 different kinds of content on Instagram, right? Photos versus videos. I want you to keep in mind that it is better for you to post 2 times a week for 6 months than it is to post every single day for 2 weeks and then vanish from your audience, okay? I know I already addressed this, but I just really want to remind you, it is better to adjust your schedule until you find the right fit for your business and your life than it is to like burn really brightly for 2 seconds and then not be on Instagram at all, okay? So even if you're just posting 2 times a week or 3 times a week, it's better to do that than it is to like dive head in and then not keep going. So pick a schedule that you can maintain. You can always increase and you can always decrease, right? But don't be afraid to adjust things if you're realizing this is not, this is not working for me. I can't keep this up, okay? All right, organize your ideas, because we've talked about our consistency, we've talked about our schedule. How do we make that happen? So develop some sort of routine for organizing your ideas. Putting them all in one place is going to help you streamline when it's time to create your content, so you don't waste time browsing. So if you're trying to figure out like, okay, if I'm going to post 3 times a week and I want to do some sort of post that helps my audience understand like a tip, a trick, or a tutorial, like how to do a fast pin or how to hide cards in your decks, like things that are going to help them use the tools and use the resources that you've created better. Anytime you get a FAQ, I want to say anytime you get a FAQ, anytime somebody DMs you or asks you a question or submits feedback that involves some sort of question, write it down. Because if one person asked, chances are there's 15 more who just haven't asked or who just didn't know that that was even a thing to ask about. So anytime something like that comes up, put it in a note in your phone, or put it, maybe you have a notepad or wherever it is. Make sure you have a place to organize those ideas so that when it's time for you to create your content, you're not like, okay, what am I going to create? So some ideas for you to organize ideas, collections of saves on Instagram. They kind of work like the Pinterest board. So if you're familiar with Pinterest, you can save things that you see on Instagram to collections, which would be like your board, and you can organize them in different ways. So maybe you see like, oh, somebody shared like 5 ways you could use boom cards to teach music class. And you'd be like, oh, I could do 5 ways you can use boom cards to teach language. right? Same kind of idea. So maybe if you see something that makes you go, oh, you save it, okay? Facebook groups, if you see somebody asking questions or sharing a deck or something like that, that you're like, oh, my audience would also like that, I'm gonna share that with them. Make sure you're right, you're putting this all in one place. I mentioned Q&As and DMs already. I mentioned the notes apps on your phone. I personally like to do the Google Keep app because it's easy to use on my phone and on my computer and on my other computer and, like wherever I am. So if I happen to be away from one of the other things and something comes up, it's easy to say, oh, add it to the list, okay? And then a Pinterest board is, right, it would work similarly to your collection of saves on Instagram. If you see something that makes you go, oh, save it to that board. So that way, when it's time for you to sit down and create, you have all of your ideas in one spot. Okay. Also, I just want to mention this because I know sometimes we get kind of limited. Don't limit your gathering to content ideas alone. So, maybe somebody sends you a question and that inspires some piece of content you create, but there's other ways to be inspired, right? So maybe somebody created a design or shared a deck in a way that when they laid out the iPad or they showed their computer, you're like, that really caught my eye. How could you recreate that in a way that's for your brand, right? So maybe your colors, or maybe you could arrange something similar, something like that. Camera angles, maybe somebody like did this on the computer screen or something like that. Also audio for reels. Reels are those short videos that take up the whole phone screen. I was going to show you my phone, but that'll be just a mess. So those are those short videos where text appears and disappears and all of those different things. When you're scrolling on Instagram, if you hear an audio for reels and you're like, oh, this would be perfect, save it. Save it so that you have it for later. I personally prefer to save my audio. You can save the link to an audio. I prefer to save that link in the Google Keep app, in my notes app on my phone, because sometimes Instagram glitches and removes all of your saved audio, which can be really frustrating. So I don't recommend using their save feature for that. Okay, let's talk about streamlining your process, because this is a lot of pieces all at once. So how do we take everything that we've been talking about and make it more efficient? Okay, so first you're going to find your process. My process and your process might look different. Okay, but I'm going to share what works for me, and maybe it'll inspire something that works for you. So in your creation techniques, in your editing, in your batching, branded templates, all of those are things that can create efficiency. So what you're seeing on the right side of the screen is a screen grab of my work in Canva, where you can see kind of how like all of that is in a similar style, all of that is in similar fonts and color. Well, there's not really colors, right? It's mostly black and white, but you get the idea, right? So working in that one set makes it easy to duplicate pages and tweak things around. You probably are already familiar with a lot of this content creation process because you create on Boom, right? So similar steps to what you do to create your Boom cards, you can apply to your Instagram process. Just a quick note in case you're not familiar with this. Batching is when you make multiple days, weeks, or even months of content in one session. So if you were to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to create content for this week on Instagram, and it takes you half an hour, that's it. And then all you have to do is click post, or maybe you load it into a scheduler and the scheduler auto posts it for you. That allows you to use your time more efficiently, because then it's not like, every single day you're spending half an hour like trying to get the perfect picture and then making sure your logo or your watermark, your name is on it, or, and then you have to type your caption and you're going to remember your hashtags, and now it's 6 o'clock and it's time for dinner. And so all of these things, right? So if you set up your batching ahead of time, even if you've just gotten the media ready, so even if you just have images or video ready to post, it makes it a lot easier for you to be more consistent because you've already done all of this work ahead of time, right? Just preparing that ahead of time helps. I mentioned branded templates at the beginning because it tie really nicely in with when we're thinking about branding. It helps with you being more cohesive, developing awareness, but it also makes everything faster because you're not going to be sitting there going, do I like this font or this font? does that color go better there, or does this color go better here? And you're not going to sit there going, because you're going to have your 15 or whatever number of branded templates ready. And you're just going to say, okay, I'm going to use this one because last time I used the other one. And then next time I'm going to use that one because then I've used this one, I've used this one. Okay, it's this one's turn, right? And it makes everything so much faster because you're not going to be sitting there making so many creative decisions. It's just going to be ready. This kind of refers to batching again. So I recommend setting aside a chunk of time to periodically create your content. This is something that was a big game changer for me in terms, not only in terms of being consistent, but also in making sure that I served my audience. Because what I was doing before I started doing this, like before I started planning, creating my content ahead of time, I was just posting like whatever happened in school that day. So I would like put things out on my desk and be like, okay, this is what we did. Okay, you know what that's not helpful for? People lesson planning, right? So if I was going to share about some sort of seasonal activity and I only shared about it that day in class, well, they've already planned their lesson for that day. They already taught the day is done, right? So if you are creating your content ahead of time, you can sit down and say, okay, what does my audience need right now? What are they probably teaching right now? And different subject areas, you're going to have more skill with this than I do. I teach at well, I'm home with my little one right now, but I teach in a special area. So, you know, somebody who teaches in Texas and somebody who teaches in North Dakota, we don't necessarily teach the same stuff at the same time of year. But right, in other content areas, you might say, okay, hey, we are all teaching fractions right now. So that means my audience is going to need my deck on fractions probably sometime this month. So you can sit down and you can say, okay, how can I show them how this deck helps them with, you know, maybe you're doing some sort of movable pieces with pizza work. Not a math teacher, I don't know, something. I'm sure if you're a math teacher, you probably have an amazing deck with fractions and some sort of manipulative to help them grasp that concept. But the point is, right, that you know this is happening ahead of time and you can plan your content ahead of time. So that way you can better support your audience who is going to be looking for a solution to this problem that they have coming up. So instead of it being like, oh no, tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day, you're like, I should post some sort of activity. 3 weeks ago, you've already said, St. Patrick's Day is coming up. Here's about 15 different ideas for you, right? So that way you know, how can I help them? That's part of why batching and sitting down to plan your content ahead of time is so important when it comes to supporting your audience and actually making sure your materials are getting into their hands to help them, okay? The other thing that I really want to make sure you are thinking about is the amount of time that you have to sit down and plan your content is going to affect your consistency, that schedule that we talked about. So maybe in your head, when you were brainstorming, you're like, okay, I'm going to post 4 times a week, and that sounds perfect. And then in reality, you're only able to sit down for a half an hour every month to plan your content. Okay, you probably, maybe you can, but you might not be able to do 16 posts in a half an hour, depending on how quick you are, right? So the amount of time that you have to work on your content is going to affect that consistency and that posting schedule. So just make sure that you're willing to adjust that accordingly. All right, step 5, encourage action. And this is so, so important on Instagram. Every single time you post, you should know, what do you want to achieve through that post? This is the same thing as lesson planning, right? When you are designing a lesson or you're creating a deck, you have an objective in mind, right? What do we want to accomplish through this lesson? What do I want to accomplish through this post? Is it likes? Is it comments? Is it saves? Is it shares? Is it link clicks? Is it sales? What is your purpose with creating that content? Give them a call to action. So when you have this purpose in mind, you're going to say, double tap this post if, right? Or comment and tell me your thoughts. Save this post for later. Share this post with a friend. Visit the link in my bio to see more. Okay? Some sort of action you want your audience to take to interact with the content that you've created and shared. You should tell them what they should do, but only one of these. Okay, it can be so tempting to be like, comments, share, and then don't forget to go click on the link and check it out. No. Pick one, just one. You can tell them more than once and in more than one way, but pick one action to focus on. That's it. Okay. And then also seeing that interaction in your insights can tell you, right, was it effective? Because if I'm telling people, comment on this deck and tell me, if you do teach fractions, and I'm seeing like they were clicking on the link in my bio because they wanted to go check out the deck. Like, first of all, that's a great thing. I want them to go check out the deck. But also now I'm saying, okay, so this post was probably more effective as a link clicky post when we're thinking about objectives versus get them to comment and interact with me kind of post, right? So those are different goals and different objectives. And so you can try a call to action, but then you can also look at, okay, what happened in your insights and look at your data and say, okay, what was effective about this post? What did they do with it? And how do I know, okay, next time, how can I replicate that? Or how can I tweak it to do what I want it to do? I also recommend using some sort of visual cue and making sure you're using mini tutorials to make sure your audience understands. So just looking at those icons along the bottom of the screen, if you're on Instagram, you probably know, okay, heart is like, that little speech bubble is your comment, the paper airplane is to share it to somebody or to share stories, and that little flag, I don't know, I'm gonna call it a flag, and the bottom is for saving a post. Does your audience know how to do all those things? Do they know why they would do any of those things? Do they know how? Do they know how it benefits them? Do they know how it supports you? And those are just the buttons on Instagram. Do they know how to get from a post to your profile, to your link in bio, from your link in bio to wherever it is that you're sending them to? Like, do they know all of those steps? And if you're not sure, you need to teach them how. Okay, so if you are telling them, hey, okay, here's my deck on fractions and pizza. I keep coming back to this example. Here's my deck on fractions and pizza. Click the link in my bio to check out the preview or to grab the free resource that I've shared with you or to, use this with your students next week. And you're not getting link clicks. It's possible that your audience, they're like, what do you mean by click the link in my bio, right? Just because we're on Instagram and we know how it works all the time, because we've been on there for a while, does not mean that every single one of your followers knows and understands how to take the action that you're telling them to take. So if you're like, Ashley, I'm using calls to action, I'm encouraging them to share this post to a friend, and then I check my insights and I've gotten no shares. Okay, one, your content might not be shareable, right? So that's always something to look at, is if you're telling them to take an action and they're not taking it, you have to look at the content you've created to make sure it aligns with what you're asking them to do. But then two, do they know how? Have you asked them? Have you shown them? And have you shown them regularly, right? Because just because you did it once 6 months ago doesn't mean they all saw it and doesn't mean your new people know how to do it. Okay, so just make sure that every single thing you do, you have a very clear way to support your audience in taking that action, just so that they understand why do they do it, what's in it for them, and how to do it. So that way, if they want to, they can, right? Because sometimes they're like, yeah, that deck looks awesome. How do I get it? Right? So make sure you're supporting them in those actions. All right, we're gonna move into some Q&A. I just want to remind you, you can find me on Instagram at teach.the.teachyourauthor for more Instagram tips. Let's do some Q&A.
Okay, I have a couple of questions to kick us off. I wanted to start by asking about your followers, because you have over 12,000 on one account and over 2,000 on the other account. And I wanted to know, does that happen all at once, or did your audience grow slowly over time?
Years. And I know some people grow a lot faster than others. I don't really do giveaways. I don't do follow loops. I don't do engagement pods. I don't do any of those sorts of things, because I want the people who come to me and stay with me to be there for what I'm creating for them, right? So I have a very specific person in mind.
Some people might not be familiar with those terms. So a lot of those are designed to get quick followers. So just it gets somebody to sign up really quickly for an incentive, but then they might drop off.
Right. Or they're just somebody who is just looking to win like $100 gift card or, whatever it is, but they're not necessarily a person that is here for the stuff that I'm creating. Like they're not necessarily a Spanish teacher, or they're not necessarily an Instagram, a teacher author looking to market on Instagram, or right, any of those sorts of things. So I would rather have an Instagram account with 100 people who I know are people who want to hear what I have to say than an Instagram account with 100,000 followers where I'm like, hello, welcome. What are you doing here?
Okay, and they haven't looked at you since.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what you get with a lot of these kind of strategies that you just listed that are geared towards getting followers quickly.
Yeah.
So I guess another thing to ask about is, can you explain a little bit more about your ecosystem that you've built? Like, what other social channels or tools do you use? I know you have a website, you probably have an email list. So like, how do you send people from one piece of content to another? And how do you think about that strategically?
Well, it's all really interconnected. So I started with the blog, and I think I have over 250 blog posts. And then I started with Pinterest, and then Instagram, and then Facebook, and then YouTube, and then just recently started messing around with TikTok.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know about that. Like, I'm not sure how into TikTok I want to get, but all of those things like that I just, and my email list, of course. I don't even really think about my email list in terms of socials because it's like a separate little world. But yeah, so all of those things. And like I mentioned kind of at the beginning, were very gradual. So I didn't like jump into doing all of these different tactics and all of these different ways to connect with all of these different people. When I felt like I was ready and I had space and time, I was like, okay, now I can try this. And I added this thing to my plate. And when I felt like I kind of had a handle on that, then I was like, okay, now I'm going to try and do this. But all of the content that I create is very interconnected. So when I create a blog post, I also, create pins for it. I create videos for it. I create Instagram content for it. And all of it kind of links back because I know that my Instagram people, like my friends on Instagram, that's a weird way to call it, but that's what it is, aren't my Facebook people. And my Facebook people aren't my Instagram people. And I know that for sure because I didn't start Facebook until somebody was like, hey, I want to see your stuff, but I don't have an Instagram. I'm nowhere else. I need you to be here. Like, okay, I'll figure that out.
It's the same thing you said before about building your frequently asked questions, your FAQ from the real questions you get asked. Somebody asked you to join a new channel and that's what inspired you to do it. You knew there was demand.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, and it took me a long time to really feel like I understood Instagram, but the more that I used it, the more I realized that it allows a far more personal connection than almost any other platform. The only other platform where I feel as connected is my email, where I can like talk to people. But the thing that I like about Instagram is that it allows for the video piece. So I can see them, I can hear them. Some of them have been like, I was thinking about this the other day. I posted some sort of, my husband and I had our 6th anniversary of getting engaged. And like some of my followers they're like congratulated me when we got engaged. I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys, it's been 6 years. Like, hello. Can you?
You've all been together for 6 years. Your husband, you, and your followers.
And like you see their little icons pop up, and so you just really develop this relationship, and you get a feel for what do they need and how can I help them, and that drives the content that I'm creating on really all of my platforms. Because then I know, okay, I can create this little tidbit on Instagram, but they maybe need something a lot more in depth, and now it's a 20-minute YouTube video. And that 20-minute YouTube video becomes a blog post also, because not everybody has time to watch a video. Sometimes they need to just skim it. And so then they get the blog post, right? So all of this stuff is connected.
So here's a question that's kind of based on that. When you link to something from your link in bio from Instagram, is there a certain place you most often send your followers? Is it most often to your blog, most often to your store most often to a particular deck, or is it a mix? Is it part of that variety that you were talking about?
It kind of depends, but I would say it is most often to my site, somewhere on my site, whether
Yeah,
it be
you can
because,
send them anywhere.
yeah, right, and because they're from there, it's easily connected and a lot more organized. So if from Instagram they click one link, they get to my site, and now my site has the video, the images, the preview, the tutorial, the, you know, all of that information in a way that's a lot more easy for them to navigate, a lot easier for them to navigate. So it's a lot more user friendly that way.
Great. So we do have a question from the audience. Deanna asks, I posted an ad for a Boom freebie and it got her 40 plus followers, and she feels like they've really stayed. That was her first ad. So she wants to know if you run Instagram ads, and if so, how often do you run them?
I do. I took a course on Facebook and Instagram ads last January, and ever since then, I have tried to run at least 3 campaigns a month. And usually what I do is I will start all of the campaigns at the same time, and then I will monitor them and adjust accordingly. So sometimes one like really works and sometimes one really doesn't for whatever reason. So I do like to run them regularly. Mostly traffic is the thing that I'm the most comfortable with. But there's all sorts of ways you could do it. So you can do kind of like your nurture, where you're just saying, here's my content that I'm pushing out, and you're trying to find new people who are gonna love you and, you know, find your people and say, oh man, this is just what I was looking for. And then you can kind of find your like middle of your funnel and your bottom of your funnel, where you're saying, okay, you've been along this journey with us for a little while. Let's see if you're ready.
So when you run traffic ads, do you have a particular cost per click in mind, or do you have any advice for somebody who's just starting for I have suggestions if you don't. So
yeah, no, I do. So one of the things that I look at is so it's called the earnings per page view, right? So when I look at my data and look at my statistics, I can see how many people have seen that deck and how many people have purchased it. And then that tells me, okay, essentially how much money do you make every time somebody visits that page? And so then I can compare that to the cost per click, right? And so if your cost per click is higher than the amount of earnings you get per page view, this is not going to be a winning ad, right? Data. Shout out for your data playbook. That's because that's the tool that I use for that. But basically, right, you can break it all down like a math problem. So if
you have a better conversion rate, you can afford to spend a little bit more.
Yes. And if it's a higher cost product, or right, all of that sort of stuff kind of plays into it. But the answer is basically that you can math it out, right? And it will tell you, you know, is this going to work out or not? And sometimes when you're running paid traffic to something, it skews your conversion because all of a sudden the views go way up. And so you just have to keep in mind, right, this is where we started. Okay, keep an eye on it. And that's like what I was saying, how you want to keep an eye on it and see, you know, what's happening with the ad. Maybe you want to turn it off. Maybe you want to increase the budget on it. Just make sure you're really paying attention to how those numbers are working out.
That makes a lot of sense. And I would just say in general, aim for under 50 cents a click, because if you're going really, really high, I mean, and that's for somebody just starting out. If you're paying so much, there's no way the math is going to work.
Right.
So
and for so many of us, for so many of us, our boom cards are, I think, pretty reasonably priced, which means that it's a lower ticket offer, which means that having a higher cost per click is probably not going to work out in your favor, right? So you want to make sure that you're considering all of the different aspects of this. It's really quite a bit of a puzzle, but that's just one more thing to consider, is if you're running it to a lower cost deck, then what's your objective here? And right, like Deanna mentioned, well, I ran it to a free deck and that wound up being really great to nurture my audience and to grow, but that's a different objective than I want to make sales, right? And make this the profit off of the ad. So long-term goal, short-term goal.
That's exactly right. And she did comment back. She said, yes, I was going for more followers. So
perfect.
That's perfect. But it still might impact, if you know you're not going to make any direct sales off of an ad, it might influence how you think about the budget.
Absolutely.
So another question is, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out with boom cards?
I'm so excited for you. So just from my perspective is I was a secondary teacher, right? High school Spanish. I had not heard of boom cards at all until I think an elementary school friend mentioned them to me when I was quarantining. And I was like, this is amazing. Like they do this, they do this, they do this, they do this. So like, okay, try to just start, like it's okay to just start with kind of a basic deck, right? Just like the multiple choice or just like multiple pictures, and then to build it out. The thing that I found helps me be the most efficient when I am creating decks is to kind of outline it first. So I say, okay, I'm going to make a deck on this topic. And then I brainstorm all of the different ways that I could have students practice that topic. And I try to think about different, well, for me, right, different modes of communication that I can include in a deck. So how do I get them reading? How do I get them writing? How do I get them listening? And ideally, how do I also get them to physically manipulate things, because that option is available on Boom. And then I look at the vocab, or I look at the grammar, and I look at what I want them to do, and I brainstorm a whole list of activities that could go with that objective for that deck. And then I create all the cards afterwards. So that way it's a lot easier. So I'm not like, what am I creating, right? I already have this list and I'm just gonna fly through that list.
And often that makes advertising or promoting those cards on Instagram easier, because you already have kind of a lesson to go with them, and a whole bunch of images that explain the entire ecosystem of learning in a way. And that makes for more interesting content, because what we see a lot, what we find when we post about boom cards a lot, is that if you were showing day after day after day just a screen with a deck on it, that would be pretty flat and uninteresting. And so instead, what we're trying to do is show dynamic engagement with the boom cards, but also with maybe a smart board or an interactive lesson with movable parts, students in the classroom actually using it, so it's a real mix of all the ways that you can build boom cards into your lesson plan. And I think that that's a good strategy if you have a particular deck that you're trying to sell as well. So if you've already thought through the whole lesson, that's really great. Yeah. So what tools do you use to manage your Instagram account? Like, do you use a tool for posting? And if so, how much do you pay, if anything, for all your tools that support Instagram?
So my main tool that I use is Tailwind, and it is paid. It's a paid scheduler. So what I do is I like create my media, create my images, create my photos, all that stuff, and I write my captions, all that. I load it into Tailwind, and then it either depending on the type of content, it either auto posts it for me, or it sends me a notification in my phone with everything all together. So I just say post, copy, paste, go. And the thing that I really like about Tailwind is that it can automatically link content ahead of time. So if I know that I'm going to be sharing like my blog post on what can you do with boom cards in Spanish class, I can pre-link that blog post. So when Tailwind pushes it out, it's already all linked in my bio. I think I have it for $15 a month. It might be $30 a month. I'm not sure. For a while so I have 2 Instagram accounts, right? So for a while I used Tailwind for one and the free Facebook Business Suite scheduler for another. And that one is fine, right? If you are like, oh, I want to try scheduling, but I don't want to pay for it, use the free Facebook Business Suite scheduler. It's great. Like, there's a lot you can do with it. The only reason why I'm like Tailwind over Facebook is because of that pre-linking feature. And because I like to set things and forget things sometimes. I got into scheduling stuff right before I had a baby. And so like being able to take a leave from my Instagram while it was still happening was super helpful for me. The other tool that I use a lot for content creation is Canva. And I used, again, the free version of Canva for years. And I think it was last year where I finally was like, all right, I'm just going to upgrade. And now I'm like, how did I use the free version for like half a decade? because I don't think I could ever go back. I couldn't tell you what it is about the free versus the paid version that makes it so much better, but love. Yes, I just saw Deanna's comment, money well spent. Absolutely. It is a great deal too, considering everything. So yeah, those are kind of my two main paid things that I use for Instagram.
So I wanted to ask you, your posts are sometimes funny, sometimes they're informative. They can even be raw with the frustrations of being a teacher. So I wanted to ask, does your tone just depend on your personal mood, or is there some more strategy there? Like, how do you decide on that?
It's a little bit of both. So because I plan my content ahead of time, there is strategy behind, what do I think people are going to need right now, and how can I support them in that, and how can I make sure that I'm connecting with them and the things that they are feeling right now. However, you cannot pre-schedule reels. So my reels are all made, if not in the moment, I would make them at least that week. And so, so my reels tend to be a lot more off the cuff, a lot more what I'm feeling or what I'm getting feelings from, because right now I'm in the classroom right now, home with my daughter, but still like I said, focusing on connecting with my audience. I have teacher friends who are in the classroom right now, or, as we're talking about things that are going on with them, and like, maybe they're like, I want to go for drinks. And then we spend a night out for drinks. And I'm like, man, some things about teaching just make me mad, You're like,
You're inspired.
yeah, then you go make a reel about that. Or like, some things are just funny and you just have to share that with your audience sometimes. So some of those tend to be a little bit more whatever is happening, or if I see an audio or like catch a trend that I'm like, oh, I could do that. I jump right on those. But my pre-scheduled stuff tends to be a lot more serious and focused, I would say. But I think that's okay. So that way they're getting a balance, but it's also a purposeful balance, because I know that I have already created this content that's going to support them with what they need. It also makes me feel like it's okay for them to see some of those like silly things or frustrating things, or sometimes family things, right? Sometimes I share personal things with my audience too. So just depends.
And you can also always postpone something that you've already scheduled. So if you have things scheduled, but something else comes up that's frankly more interesting, like a pandemic, you might want to change what you've scheduled to fit what's actually going on in the world.
Oh yes, absolutely. So many things. And one of the other things that's really hard about right now, well, I mean, the last several years at this point, is that I might create a piece of content with a specific teacher in mind, right? Maybe somebody asked me a question, like, oh, I got you. Like, I have something coming up for you. And then somebody comments on it and they're like, this is great, but my kids aren't allowed to get out of their seats right now. Oh, well, hold on then. Let me just share 10 ways that your students can do things independently, quietly, and not move, because everybody's situation is so different right now. So you really need to make sure that you're considering all of these different aspects of what's happening. I mean, around the world, but around our country too. It's like, okay, just because you're here doesn't mean that person, right? All of the expectations are different. So how are you serving all of your audience members all at once? You just differentiate your content for them, really.
I think that's one of the reasons why people spend so much time on social media, compared to you could be watching a movie or doing something else. But the great thing about social media is it is really in the moment. So you're talking to people about what's going on today.
Yeah, like I've been sharing about, there are a few bills in different states around right now that are talking about like having teachers post their lesson plans for the year in advance by like July 1st or June 30th. And it's just like, that's just, that's a topic, right? We can talk about. So I've created a few pieces of content around that, because it is something that is interesting and it's good to discuss with your audience. And different people have commented and shared pieces of it that I hadn't heard yet in the discussion or seen yet or read yet. Or it's nice because then you get another perspective. Like, I did read an article on this, but that article did not mention what this teacher just told me. And that teacher is in that area. So
if you scheduled that for 2 months out, it would obviously no longer be relevant. It's the type of thing you have to discuss while it's happening.
Yeah. exactly.
So with that being said, how much time do you spend on Instagram as opposed to running other aspects of your business, including actually creating decks? Like what percentage of your time in let's say a month do you spend thinking about or working on Instagram stuff?
It's a good question. So I actually just finished scheduling all my content today for March for 2 accounts. And it took me probably 3 hours for putting all together like the videos, photos, the captions, the everything, and scheduling it and getting that all done. But because my content has now included so many more reels, I also spend probably about 40 minutes a week making reels. But I repurpose it between the 2 accounts. So I might take one video and then post the same video to both accounts with different information and different, like, you know, just different, because I can't post the same information, but it doesn't mean I can't reuse the same silly video or the same silly voiceover, or if I'm going to take the time to, get dressed and take a video, then I'm going to use that for both. So I would say probably around, I don't know, less than 10 hours a month on Instagram total for sure. I don't know.
Does that include responding?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I've gotten way faster at using I copy and paste responses back and forth from people, or Instagram has a tool where it's basically like a shortcut reply, right? You type in a word and it auto populates the full response. I have those maxed out. I didn't know that you could hit a max. Surprise, you can, but you can delete old ones, whatever, it's fine. So there, let's see, what else
That's
do I
a good trick. That's definitely a good trick.
It's really handy because reels have such a long life, right? Sometimes it'll be 3 months later and somebody will be commenting like, can I have this? And you're like, yeah, what was my shortcut? Oh, La Familia. And it'll pull up the whole like, hi, thanks for being interested in this thing. I'm here to help you with this. There you go. So that's
It's
handy.
like having a whole team.
Yeah, it is, except for it's all as much automated as possible. Otherwise, like creation stuff, I break everything down into weekly tasks. So when you look at a month, my first week of the month, I do these things. And my second week of the month, I do those things. And I break it apart because otherwise I find myself working at like 9 o'clock at night for no reason. like not because I have to, not because I'm behind or like trying to respond to questions or trying to create stuff. I enjoy it and I get sucked into it. And I know it's not necessarily the healthiest thing. So I found that kind of limiting my tasks. So I can say, it's the first week of the month. You have finished everything on your to-do list. Go sit on your butt. Like, relax.
And do you follow anyone in particular for ideas on Instagram, like blogs or other handles on Instagram? Where do you get your ideas? Are there any places you go back to again and again?
This is going to sound ridiculous, but myself, like now that it's been years of Instagram creating, what I will do is I'll go into my insights and I'll sort it by the different pieces of data. And so I'll say, like reach is kind of whatever, but like website taps, most saves, and that kind of thing. And I say, okay, what about this piece of content got that reaction? And how can I either recreate that or repurpose that or reformat that to use it? Or maybe just like repost the dang thing. Or like kind of what I was mentioning with like, what step was that? Step 3? I don't know, where I mentioned how like you gather your ideas and you save them. I just follow other teachers. And if I see somebody has shared like, here's, I don't know, 10 reasons why you love Boom. I'm like, yes, I do love Boom for 10 reasons. And I will save that post and be like, okay, that was great. How can I reshare this? And, maybe I'll message that creator and I'll say, I really loved your post. Are you okay with me? And then I'll ask, right, whatever it is that I want to do with that post. Just to keep in mind for people who are watching, if you really like a piece of content from a creator, you have to have permission from that person before you reshare that content. So I know sometimes people are like, oh, as long as you put the handle in the caption or as long as you tag them in the image, that's not okay. That's a copyright violation. And Instagram can, and well, if the person asks them to, they'll remove it, but it's violating the terms of use and it's not really great practice. So it's a much
And
better
I
way.
would say the same with music as well. Be careful using music. When you use the music sticker in stories, then Instagram is paying to license that music. But if you just take a piece of music and use it, then the artist isn't getting paid. So that's not a very nice thing to do.
So those are good things to keep in mind as you're looking for different ways to share content that came from somebody else, is to make sure you have the permission to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We did have a question from our internal team who wanted to know how exactly you make your reel covers and what those look like. Would it be possible for you to pull up, I'll keep asking you a couple other questions, but would it be possible to pull up an example of what your cover images look like, just to share that template? And obviously everybody would have their own unique one. Nobody should copy Ashley's exactly, but we could take a look at that and see how it looks. And in the meantime, I will ask you, how do secondary students react to boom cards? Because some people are under the misconception that boom cards are only for elementary school or much younger students, and that's not the case.
Right. So I think it's a lot in how you design them, right? And how you present them to your students, because if you give them one, like, and just like with anything with art on it, if you are giving them something that's like really cutesy and elementary feeling and just like not age appropriate, yeah, they're gonna react to it like, why did you make this like kid thing for me? But I mean, just like you design anything for your students, right? You know what your students are capable of, you know what they're gonna be interested in, you know what they're gonna be engaged by, like all of that sort of information. You already have that relationship built with your students. So you know, like, how do I make this to reach the students that I am serving? And then you just, I don't know, I wouldn't get a deck that's meant for a first grader for my high school students, just like you wouldn't.
That's going to fall a little bit flat.
Yeah, exactly. Like you just wouldn't. So as an educator, I think that we are all aware, like there's great ways where you can use music in your classroom, but sometimes like one song might just not work very well. Okay, all of that is different things that you could do. Like, you know, like you can respond to the students that you have, but use the same tools. Right.
And since you do foreign language, do you make your decks for a range of ages? Do you recommend them for a range of ages, or is it really mostly geared towards secondary learners?
So I have taught 6th through 12th grade students, but here's the tricky part about this is that I taught Spanish 1 and Spanish 2. So I taught novice learners, which means that I know that some of my resources have been used with elementary school students. The biggest thing that I say, like, first of all, it's really nice that they can preview the deck. So I always say just preview it and see if you think it'll work for your students. And I always make sure to, like, when I post on Instagram about it, to give them several images so they can see, okay, what does this task look like? How was it set up? But I always I feel better recommending it for secondary because that's what I had in mind. That's what I have experience in. That's what I have expertise in. There are people who create for elementary, and that's their experience and their expertise. So why wouldn't, why wouldn't you go to them? I guess is how I feel about that. Like I love my secondary students. It's not like I didn't love my elementary expertise, but or experience, but it was 2 weeks in college almost 10 years ago. Oh my gosh, probably actually 10 years ago now. Okay.
Well, we're about out of time. So
I did pull up that cover. Do you want to see?
Great. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Okay, so this is just a folder that I have, or not a folder, a design that I have where it's just a few things that I would just like maybe open on my phone really quick and tweak the title or tweak the text. And there's a mix, right? So I have 2 Instagram accounts. So like this branding is one account, this branding is a different account. But see how it's the same kind of setup? I just use in between. And there's some that are like a little bit more cutesy.
The same person.
Yeah, like it's just me, but it's sometimes I'll tweak this to the here or whatever. The biggest thing to keep in mind when you are creating a reel cover, let's see if I can show kind of, this one might be a good. Yeah, okay, so if you're creating a reel cover and like, for example, you're using Canva or whatever your design is, you're gonna use a 1080 by 1920, so 1080 width, 1920 height, and it's the Instagram story size. But when you're creating, you want to keep the square in mind. And what I mean by that is I'm just gonna pull it up really quickly and show you. So you can insert a square, like literally just insert a shape, and you're gonna make it go all the way to the width at 1080. And then you're gonna use the guidelines on the tool to see, okay, so now this is centered, right? Top, bottom, and in the middle. And I'm gonna use the transparency tool to just kind of give me an idea. Okay, this big tall rectangle is what I'm gonna see in the Reels feed, but this middle square, that's what's gonna show up on my profile. So that helps me kind of keep both things in mind when I'm designing, because if you threw your title like way up here or half up, half down, they're not gonna be able to read it on your feed as nicely. And you wanna do the same thing when if you are designing a reel, like to save the whole video from Canva or from whatever design program, you're gonna do the same thing. You wanna make sure all of your content is right here in the middle, because down here, it's gonna get cut off by like your picture and your caption. And over here is gonna get cut off by like the buttons to interact. All of those things are things that will detract from the actual content. So you really wanna think about that middle square.
Yeah, that's really great advice and very, very important. So thanks so much to Ashley and to everyone who attended today. We will be following up with an email that includes the link to this recording, as well as links to the resources that Ashley mentioned. And if you need help or have questions for Boom Learning, you can always reach out to us at help@boomlearning.com. And before we close, we'd ask you to fill out the survey form that we have in the chat. We really hope you'll join us next week for the last webinar in our publishing series, which is called How to Score an A+ Store. And thanks again so much, Ashley. This has been really, really fun, and we've all learned a lot. And for anybody watching the recording of this on YouTube, please click the Boom logo and subscribe to our channel. Thanks so much. And thanks again, Ashley.
Thank you.